Welcome to Deep Dive with Dr. D. The entire goal of this podcast is to help you see that you have it within you to do amazing things. Mic on, and it's much better sound. So, hi everyone, welcome back to the show. I'm going to continue the story of my life. I left off on the last episode that is titled David and Cindy Get Married, with me having gotten out of the military, us moving back home to the Tacoma area. We stayed with Cindy's parents for a little while right out of the military. If you've been following along, you know, finances were not our thing. We were not good with managing our money. So we came back. I remember my first job out of the military. It was either one of two. One, I don't remember that I went right on the road right out of the gate with Bob Jones to try long haul trucking, or if I got the phone sales job. I'm not sure which one it was, but I do remember the phone sales job. It was selling. It was kind of a fundraising thing for the Pierce County Sheriff's Association, and then if you donated a certain amount, you got these free kids books. It was terrible. It was about how it sounded. Cold calling out of a phone book. Didn't do that one very long. And then, you know, the conversation was, you know, why don't you try going on the road with your father-in-law and seeing how that goes? And so I did. And that didn't last long. Bob and me, we got along well enough, but we were both drinkers. And, you know, imagine being on an 18-wheel truck with your father-in-law and just the dynamics of that with both of you drink. I smoked pot. He did not. He was very much against marijuana, so I had to kind of sneak that. And then he drank and drove a couple times. It was not fun. It was kind of scary. And then I wasn't a real treat. So that just lasted for one trip across the country, back down the country, and then back up. And then somehow we managed, I think we all figured out a way to help David and Cindy get their own place. Bob and Lucille helped us a lot along the way financially. So we got an apartment in Tacoma off of 84th and Pacific. And it was a nice place. We always tended to live a little bit beyond our means. I was driving a little old 78 Datsun wagon. And, you know, I think I had gotten the job at BMW Northwest around this time. I was detailing cars for minimum wage, but it was full-time work. And, you know, it was a prestigious company and there were opportunities, blah, blah, blah. So I got in. I always worked hard wherever I went. And so we were just managing our lives, and it wasn't pretty all the time. If you've been following along, you know I was drinking and smoking pot and dabbling with other drugs, but I always kind of managed. You know, I didn't get in trouble with the law. Surprisingly enough, I never got a DUI, or they were DWIs back then. And I do remember the store that was right by our little apartment. I used to go there and buy alcohol, and I wasn't 21. The guy was a cool dude, the cashier, so I knew when to go when he was working. And I remember this because I remember when I turned 21, I kind of messed with them. I'm like, hey, do you want to see my ID? And he looked, he's like, oh my God, you've never been 21. He just never carded me. So whether he knew or not, I don't know. Alas, just like my childhood, I moved a lot. We stayed there for a period of time, maybe a year, and then we moved out to Puyallup, in between downtown and South Hill, right on Meridian Street. My mom was living at this apartment complex. These family friends of ours that we'd known forever were living at these apartment complexes. And so there was probably some desire to go out there. I remember I ended up working at the apartment complex a little bit on the side, helping dump garbages from the dumpsters. I would drive this truck and tow all the little dumpsters up to the compactor and, you know, throw them all in there. I remember helping clean out apartments. So there was must have been some rent forgiveness to do that. So we moved out there, and I remember cooking. That was always like one of my backup jobs, having grown up in restaurants. I remember cooking at a restaurant in downtown Puyallup. I can't think, Jason's. I think it was Jason's. Anyway, I was cooking. Cindy got a job, and it turned into a full-time management gig for her at a salon out in Federal Way. And our marriage was pretty rocky. You know, it was always pretty rocky. Why? Well, I was unfaithful. Pretty much a regular thing. You know, I was unfaithful when we were kids and teenagers. She would always take me back, and I think it slowed down some, but it continued in our marriage. And I remember when she got that job that it was a threat to me. I was jealous. I was a very jealous man in a relationship. Kid. I wasn't really behaving like a man. And when she got this job and got some independence, that was really difficult for me to take, because I was used to her not working or working just a little bit. Well, when she got this job and got some independence, that's when she started challenging me on some of my bullshit and started saying, hey, you know, you can't do this. I'm going to leave you, blah, blah, blah. So there's a period of time at this apartment complex where we split up again. We would have breakups, like she would go stay at her parents', I think, or something like that. But this time, she actually got her own apartment. My mom must have been involved somehow. I know she was in management at this hotel, and Cindy got her own apartment. At least I think it was supposed to be temporary until she could afford to get her own place. And I stayed in an apartment. And I had a dog at the time, IROC. He was a Tibetan Terrier, good dog. And I remember this because then he was left home alone, and he tore that apartment up. He was not happy about being left home alone. But I also, this is 89, close to the 90s. And I remember because we got back together and Cindy got pregnant. And that brought my son into the world. And it was, for us, an opportunity again to try to make our marriage work. And I remember it being a special time. A few things happened during this time. This story of my life is kind of a crazy one, but me and Cindy did have a lot of positive memories together. It wasn't always ugly. We were two people who loved each other and cared about each other. Like, even decades after we had divorced, we always, maintained a relationship in the best interest of Tyler, but also in the best interest of our friendship. We helped each other through a lot. As you listen to this, you'll learn about that. So she got pregnant, and so we started going, okay, I remember saying, I'm going to be a dad, and I'm 22. Tyler was born, I was 23. So Tyler was born in July of 1990, and I don't remember if we had moved yet. Maybe we had moved from the apartments to Tacoma. We moved into a little duplex that's still there. It's by the Tacoma Mall. In fact, now the Tacoma police headquarters is right there. And these little duplexes, they're still there. A few of them are still there. And the one we lived in was there. It was 36 Nevada Street in Tacoma. Somewhere in there, and I can't remember if she was pregnant, because I remember doing his room in rocking horses. We had moved from Puyallup to Tacoma. She had a, healthy pregnancy, but it was a lot for her. I remember that. And a really cool thing happened for me work-wise during this time period. A friend of a friend that I'd known since childhood, Julio, he had gotten a cool job at Loomis Armored. And I remember meeting his girlfriend's dad, who also worked there. He had worked there a long time. And so I started saying, hey, if there's any opportunities, I'd love for an opportunity to interview. And it happened. I got an opportunity to interview, and man, so I'd gotten out of the military in 87, and had probably 6 different jobs from then until the time I got the opportunity at Loomis, and all of the jobs were minimum wage. You know, I have this document from one of the jobs where I did loss prevention work catching shoplifters, and I was making $4.50 an hour. A full 2 weeks, I would take my take home, and yeah, this was a long time ago, but I remember it was like we were always barely scraping by. $334 for a 2-week period. It's like, wow. And Cindy worked part-time, and then she got the full-time gig. And I remember she tried working the most she could, but then I remember when I got the job at Loomis, it was good pay. It was like way above minimum wage and benefits. For the first time since the military, got a job with benefits. Medical, which, you know, if you're going to have a baby, it's a good thing to have. And so we were fortunate. And the job at Loomis, I, to this day, have really positive memories of it. You're going to hear about, oh my God, my piss poor decisions and how I lost that job. I'll do that in this episode, and then that's probably going to be it for this one by the time I get there. But we moved. We were in a little duplex. It was small, but it was a 2-bedroom, and we did the baby room. I remember it was all baby blue browns with rocking horses. And I also remember I think it was like almost to the day Tyler was born that we could not come to an agreement on a name for our son. And if my son listens to this, I know, son, you don't like your name, but know that me and your mom struggled agreeing on a name. So, alas, Tyler was born July of 1990. I'm working at Loomis Armored. Cindy is a stay-at-home mom. And even with the good Loomis job, the good pay, which I remember it being good pay, I think I was making $11, $12 an hour, which seems like nothing now, but this is 1990. And for a kid with just a, GED and, military veteran with infantry, I didn't have any real skills, or a college degree or anything like that. It was a good gig for me. And it was full-time, steady work. I even remember getting to overtime. The branch I worked out of is still there in Tacoma, which is just shocking to me because they're busy, right? So if you're from Tacoma and you know where Lincoln High School is, you know where Loomis Armored is in Tacoma. It's a small little place where a lot of business goes in and out of. Alas, that's what's going on. I made some friends there. Obviously, coworkers. I think we had out of the Tacoma branch 20 of us. My manager, Dan Rushing, is an amazing human. I hope he's still alive. I haven't talked to him in years. And I met others. And Chris was my best friend. And Chris had a wife. And we used to hang out. So the drinking, let me talk about the drinking. Drinking was still happening. At Loomis, it was normal, so we would start early. And I lived literally, if you know the Tacoma area, Lincoln High School and where the Tacoma Police Station is by the Tacoma Mall, that's the distance I drove to work every day. It wasn't far, like 2 miles max. And early days, I always started, we're in the shop by 6, loading our trucks, getting things to go. And depending on the route you had, that's how I really got to know the Puget Sound area. The loss prevention job, I drove all over the Puget Sound. And then Loomis Armored doing route driving, I learned all about the Puget Sound. Pierce County, Kitsap County, Thurston County was our area. And I think that was it. We had a lot of area to cover. And so you had different routes. And myself and Chris, we were hardworking dudes. I'm a still hardworking guy, but this was physical labor, and we were good. We were fast, and you always paired up on a truck, you had a driver and then you had someone working in the back. And you wanted a good driver. You wanted someone that knew how to get to where we needed to go and wouldn't dump your load in the back. Now, when you're like, what are you talking about, dump your load? So money, boxes of coin, they're heavy and you would have to stack them high in the trucks. And if you took a corner too fast, you dump your person's load. We were called custodians, the guy in the back. Anyway, so you wanted a good driver that could drive fast, but strategically, right? And the guy in the back, you wanted someone that could get in and out of stops in a very efficient manner. Now, Chris and I became close. Oh, the drinking. So we would go into work early. We would get off about 3:30. You wanted to get off as soon as possible. You didn't want overtime. They were always like, you don't want to get your route done in 8 hours. And so we'd get done and we would go to the bar. That was normal. We would go to the bar and have a few beers and then go home. Now, if you've been following along, you remember David was usually the guy that had problems with, just having a couple, 3 beers. So here I am, a married guy with a young baby at home, my son Tyler, and I wouldn't always go home after a couple beers. What I would do is I would do one of two things. I would either go right to continuing to drink and stay out until late at night, or I would go home hoping that Cindy would be gone and I would change real quick out of my uniform and then go out. Or, yes, I was a real treat, I would go home and cause some kind of argument, usually because I was already drinking and she was like, why are you already drinking? And then I'd get in an argument and then leave and go out and party. This was during the week, my friends. So that stuff costs money. So on top of already not knowing how to manage my money well, I would piss it away drinking. So that was normal. To work, we worked our asses off. Like I would literally work with hangovers, but still do my job. This was all normal for the work environment I was in. We worked hard. We played hard. Playing hard didn't go well, being a young father of a son whose wife is at home bearing the brunt of the responsibility for that. So Chris and I became close, and Chris had a wife. They did not have any children, but they would come over and we'd play cards. And remember, I am not a good husband. I'm very unfaithful. And this is not something I just like even talking about. And Chris I worked with him all the time. Well, me and his wife started making moves on each other on the down low. And that started happening. That was not good. And I'll never forget, we had an affair, started an affair. And Cindy had some suspicions, as she always did, rightly so. And I don't remember if me and Cindy would argue about it, but I would deny it. And I honestly, Chris was such a nice guy. He was such a good dude. He was from Tennessee. He was also a military veteran. Him and his wife, and maybe it's good I can't remember her name. Cindy always hated her name, but I can't remember her name. Like decades later, just hearing her name would anger Cindy. But they had met when he was in the military and moved up here because this is where she was from. And I don't remember how he got his job at Loomis, but that's where he and I met. That's where we all met. And so we're having this affair, and I'm going into work every day working with Chris. And mind you, Chris was a pretty stocky guy. He was a pretty big dude, really nice guy. And we carried guns at Loomis, right? If you see armored car people, alas, I remember her calling me and saying, Chris found your ID. And I'm like, what do you mean? her and I had went out, lied, snuck out, and she had my ID for whatever reason. And she was taking a shower, and Chris had some suspicions, must have, and found my driver's license in her pocket while she was showering, and then confronted her, and it all blew up. I'll never forget going into work that day, because it was in the morning. Or the night before, she told me, I don't remember. And I had to face him at work. And I remember we were in the coin room. We had a room where all the box coin was, and he was devastated. He was angry. And I could say nothing. I had no defense. And he had moved to Washington for her to, begin his life post-military. And, it rocked the boat at Loomis Armored in big ways. And I remember the argument and fight we had. And I remember our boss, Dan, my boss, who really had been mentoring me, and because I was having problems with drinking, I would show up and he'd be like, dude, you got to tame it. He really cared about me. And I remember not only was Chris devastated and I had broken his trust, again, I had broken my wife's trust. And yes, that's a big deal. But I had done it so many fucking times to this point. But Dan, I remember him. I had broken his trust. And I'm pretty sure we got put on different routes. I don't think Dan could fire me for it. I kept my job. Oh, God. And I wish I could say that was enough, that I stopped the fucking affair and I stopped all the... It didn't. And Chris quit and he moved back to Tennessee. He got a divorce. I don't remember if they got a divorce or not, but it devastated him. And it was because of me and his wife's behavior. It devastated Cindy and I's already rocky marriage with a young baby. This time period, I don't remember. Maybe we both kind of were like, okay, we can't have this affair, but that's not what happened. God, don't cheat, friends. It never works. It never does. It's always ugly. So what did we end up doing? Her and I, Chris left. And so her and I were in love. Garbage. I moved out from Cindy's. I moved out to Lynn Gilmore's house, the guy who had sexually abused me when I was young. I was using him in a lot of ways, and I used him for a place to stay. I don't think I had even told Cindy to this point what Lynn Gilmore had done. She knew him because I would go out and do work for him. At any rate, I moved out there. I think Cindy, yeah, she did. She kicked me out. She was done. Yes. Now I remember she was done. She kicked me out. I had to go. Rightly so. And Chris moved to Tennessee. So then me and the girl were in love. Let's move in together. So if you've been listening and you're angry at me, it's okay. I accept that, and you're going to appreciate what karma did. So me and her, God, her name is just a blank to me right now. She had a really generic, Laura. There it is. Cindy hated that name, hated it. From that time forward, she never wanted to hear that girl's name ever. So we move in together, and Laura was renting a house from her parents just off of 112th in Parkland. So we move in together, and oh, it's love. It was garbage. It was bullshit. So I just transferred my behavior from Cindy to her house. I guess we both did. We were drinking a lot. We were partying on the weekends. And then I had this friend, Ron, from childhood, who I must have still stayed connected with. And Ron, you guys are going to like this if you're hanging on. And then I'm going to wrap this one up. You're going to say, ha ha, David Karma's a bitch. So Ron started hanging out with us. Yeah, because, Laura was cool. She was okay with drinking and doing speed. And so we were drinking on the weekends, probably drinking during the week. But on the weekends only, we would do speed, and old school meth is what it was called. It was basically old school crank. You could do lines of it. We didn't smoke it. We just snorted it. And so we'd stay up all weekend long. I remember playing dice, and Ron was around all the time. And Ron was cool. He was just the cool guy. I loved Ron. He was such a good dude. And I'll never forget... I had the opportunity to work overtime on some Saturdays. So I remember coming home this one Saturday. So my son is a baby. Yeah, good job, Dad, you freaking loser. So I leave, she kicks me out. Cindy kicks me out. And I'm living with Laura. Tyler's not even 6 months old, or just around 6 months old. I'm living with the freaking woman I cheated with. Her husband, who was my best friend, has left completely and moved back to Tennessee. And then my buddy Ron's hanging out a lot. There are a few things happen. One, again, this is still before the internet, before cell phones. You just had landlines, and if you wanted, you communicated by landline or letters or whatever. And you'll understand why I'm bringing that. Because I remember I was very jealous. I didn't have trust. Duh. I was untrustworthy, therefore I did not trust others. And I had suspicions that something was up with Laura, and I couldn't really place it, Like, it was just kind of weird. And I remember finding in her dresser drawer a U-Haul packet and a whole bunch of information. She had a U-Haul reserved. A couple things happen in this scenario. This is great. And so I called her. I'm like, what's going on here? It was a U-Haul to Tennessee. And she's like, oh, yeah, I've been talking to Chris. We were going to get back together, but we're not now because I love you. That was one of the first ones. I'm like, oh, wow. Okay. So I stayed. And then there was this one fateful Saturday. I worked overtime, and I got back, and Ron, the cool guy, he had brought over his computer. Now, this is old school, no internet. It was for playing games, or who knows what you did on old school. You did some word processing. And he had brought it over to our house because he was there so much. He was like our friend, blah, blah, blah. He was cool. And he had brought it over. And I remember coming home and seeing two chairs at the computer really close. And I'm like, what's going on here? Oh, nothing's going on. And I was like, long story short, she cheated on me with my friend, Ron. Yep, that was great. That was awesome. And I remember, so I used to have, with Loomis, I had a firearm. And I remember, so she left me for Ron. She kicked me out. Again, I had, it wasn't my house. And I remember this. A couple touches happened. My sister let me move in with her temporarily. And I remember calling Cindy, trying to get back together with her. But by this point, she was done. She's like, nope. And I remember being jealous and pissed off at Ron and going over to Laura's house where now they were living together. And sitting outside, I had gotten my Chevy Love by this time in my truck with my firearm and wanting Ron to come outside and have a talk with me. Kind of glad he never did. Don't know if I ever would have done anything that would have ended me up in prison or not. So, Karma was just saying, hey, David, here I am. Hope you're loving your life decisions you're making, because I was not making good ones and they were all coming around to bite me in the ass. So this is probably not, we're probably about 91 by this point. Yeah, this is about right. 91-ish by this point. And so now, where am I living? Some moves that happened, right? In probably a 2-year period, I had 4 or 5 moves. Now I'm single. I remember Cindy's dad and mom, when I really blatantly cheated on Cindy, meaning they found out and I moved in with Laura, we got our divorce. Her parents paid for us. So we got an attorney, and we did, I had, every other weekend to see my son. I paid child support. I was responsible for his health care. So that all happened. So she was out. We were done. And I remember the phone call where I had tried getting her back because she would always come back, but she was done. She was done with me. She stayed in that place by the Tacoma Mall for a little bit, and then she ended up moving downtown. But that was it for marriage number 1. Lasted a total of 5 years, I think, from the time we got married to the time we got divorced. But that overall relationship with Cindy lasted, since we were 12, and then what are we, 22, 23? So that time span, a lot of off and on. And so here I am. I say I rebooted my life at 29 and 40. Yes, that is very true, but I also had reboots due to, divorces and breakups, and this was a pretty significant one. And this was my first divorce, and now I'm a dad, and I have my job at Loomis. That was the good thing, is for whatever reason, I think if he could have fired me, he probably would have. And I think because Chris moved back to Tennessee, there wasn't that, dynamic. But it changed. My time at Loomis, I had a couple other friends there. Julio worked there. I don't know if he had left by this point. And another guy, I can't think of his name. Mike Reyes was a friend. But it all changed. It all changed dramatically when I created that situation with Chris and ruining his marriage. That's where we're at. Now, I always say I like to leave with hope. Boy, it can be tough when I'm talking about my crazy life story because it can seem hopeless. Well, I'm fortunate. That I've had supporters in my life, even when my life has been really messy. And my sister Sherry, I hope she listens to these. My sister Sherry, my ex-brother-in-law Vern, they were always supporters. Vern got me that job with the loss prevention, and he was someone I was talking to a lot along the way. My sister, she put a roof over my head that time, and then she will do it again in the future. And she was always one that was trying to lift me up. My brother, Bob, he's kind of going through his own stuff. I don't know if he had went through his first divorce yet or not. But he went through his own stuff, but he was always one who was trying to lift me up. Uncle Tom, who, became my stepdad, he was someone who was always a positive force in my life, especially when I get into my really dark days. I'm grateful for those people. I'm also grateful that there were people who were like, yeah, no, David, your behavior's bullshit. Cindy, I'm thankful that she finally stood up for herself, and let go of my chaos. Certainly she had her own stuff, but my behavior with her was atrocious. So the hope is that you can change. If you listen to this and you identify with this as a male, if you're a cheater, you can make a change. I had to make a conscious decision, which I do in my later years, that, infidelity and all of that is not acceptable, and there are better ways to behave. As I walk through the next couple podcasts, I'll go into my heavy drug use and then my journey to becoming a person in recovery. Recovery is possible. It takes me a little while. I'm 22, 23 here, and it wouldn't be till 6 years later that I would really start making some significant movement toward recovery. But I'm grateful for the people in my life that have been mainstays throughout, and I hope that you have the same. There it is. As always, thanks for listening. Episodes are released twice a week, Mondays and Fridays. You can also follow me on my other social media channels in the description.